Hello and welcome to a special Devil's Advocate. As the Commonwealth Games seem to go from bad to worse, we present the views of two of the best-known Englishmen living in this country. What do they make of this situation? My guests are the former BBC correspondent and the well-known author Sir Mark Tully, and the well-known author, historian and journalist William Dalrymple. William Dalrymple, as someone who's lived much of his adult life in this country and written extensively about India, what do you make about this whole situation, which now is being called a fiasco?
Well, I don't live here because of this country's Germanic efficiency. I think if we were after that, I think neither of us would really have settled here at all. As anyone who lives in this country knows, this is a country where things muddle through and tend to happen in the end. But it's not somewhere that operates on Swiss watch time and I don't think it's any great surprise at all that the games are a little bit delayed. And who knows, it's not possible yet that things will be all right in the night. It usually ends up all right in most spheres of life.
Picking up on that thought, and given the way that India functions, are you surprised by the shoddiness of the preparations at this late stage?
Well, no, I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not surprised. I'm a bit reminded of that film Monsoon Wedding. I don't know if you saw it. And you know, I was here in the Asian Games in '82, and we had a very similar situation. I'm a bit surprised by the solution which they seem to have adopted. It seems very strange to me to get hold of a lot of IAS officers and suddenly think that they can take charge of the situation. I'd have thought you needed people with more specific expertise than that to take charge of it.
In other words, these officers could actually make the situation worse than it is.
Could do. Could do.
Do you think
lots of cups of coffee being passed?
Do you think really that in fact the mistake, as Mani Shankar Iyer says, was actually bidding for the games to begin with? Should India, given the way it functions, given its poverty, actually have opted out of this sort of ambitious plan?
Well, as we all know, there are many Indias, but there are two Indias in particular vis-a-vis this sort of thing. One is private India and one is government India. Private India tends to work very efficiently these days. Private companies are amazingly up to the mark, and then there's government India, which is always corrupt and behind the times and slow at doing things. And it does seem as if the government India has won through on this occasion. That
would private India have given you more confidence if they were running the games?
I think if it had gone to the right people in private India, one could easily have imagined it being more efficient. Certainly, I mean, there are things that government and private corporations which have done very successfully, such as the Delhi Metro. This, however, seems to be old government India back in its characteristic sort of half done or three-quarters done, slow, old-fashioned way.
Mark Tully, what do you think is actually going to happen on October the 3rd when the games start? Do you think like those big Indian weddings where everything is chaotic till the last moment and then suddenly miraculously falls in place, the games will actually happen successfully, or will we be reduced to tears and covered with embarrassment?
Well, I think I'd rather say what I hope will happen rather than what I think will happen.
And there's a big difference between the two, is there?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I do think India has this amazing ability to pull through at the last moment, and that is what I very much do hope will happen. I can't agree with my old friend Mani Shankar Iyer that it would be good for India if the games failed, although I do agree with him that it might be wise for India to learn from this lesson that they have more important things to concentrate on than putting all their energies into running games.
So don't bid for the Olympics, don't bid for the next Asian Games.
Certainly not the Olympics or the Asian Games, I would say, no.
Let's, William Dalrymple, look for a moment at the specifics. How do you view the spate and proliferating nature of allegations of corruption? There seems to be a new one every single day, and the supply is endless.
Again, I don't think it's anything new. I mean, we've seen this sort of thing before, but I agree the scale of it is alarming.
Has that taken you by surprise?
I'm intrigued that it's come public. I mean, normally this sort of thing goes on, that you hear about backhanders afterwards privately. The fact that it's been in the papers so prominently, and the fact that people have promised to take action and so on, that is, I think, new. But again, it's not entirely surprising. As everyone knows, you can't even get a guy to come and mend your telephone without offering a bribe in this country, and it goes upwards from that.
Most people are convinced that the villain is in fact Suresh Kalmadi. You've probably known him for years. In your eyes, is he covered with guilt, or is he being unfairly targeted as he claims?
Well, I have a different view on corruption, on this whole corruption thing. I don't know how much of it is proved, and I honestly don't know how much of it is a journalistic tamasha organised by people like you.
You think that could be the case this time around as well?
I think there is an element of journalistic exaggeration, and there is certainly an element of trial by journalism in all this. I mean, Suresh Kumari, I've known him for a long time. He's been a sports administrator. I'm not prepared to sit in front of you and say, I know that he is corrupt. And yet, this is what many journalists are saying, and I think that's wrong.
Is the press being unfair to him?
Yes, I think so.
So he has actually an argument when he says, I'm being picked upon.
Yes, I do think so, yeah.
What about when you come to the next big issue, William Dalrymple, the stadiums? How do you view the leaks, the delays, and the dismal state of Delhi's roads and pavements today?
Well, the roads and pavements are a shocker, and perhaps if anything good comes out of this, it'll be a wholesale re-evaluation of this. India has aspirations to be a superpower. The economy is growing very fast, and there is this miserable infrastructure. It is a wider problem than just the roads of Delhi. All over the country, the development is being held back by poor roads, poor communications, poor railways, poor...
Can you be sure the roads will be put back? I mean, they may actually deteriorate further.
I could easily imagine it. And again, it's something that's happened, every monsoon. But this year, it does seem to be much worse. I mean, just getting to this house every day is a major trial.
You're living in a city, Mark, where many people are absolutely panic-stricken about what's going to happen to Delhi when the games actually start. Do you share the concern that we could end up with gridlock and confusion, chaos?
Well, certainly I share the concern about traffic. I mean, the journey I've just been through to get to William's house here has been not exactly pleasant, to put it mildly. Yes, of course, certainly I do share the concern about the traffic in particular.
So are you going to be in Delhi when the games start, or are you going to escape?
I think I'm going to be in London, actually. That's not totally deliberate.
But very convenient and practical.
Yes.
What about you, William? Are you going to be in Delhi?
Going to be here for the first couple of days and then getting the hell out. No, I think it will be unpleasant, and I think it will be a lot of traffic. That said, I think one thing needs to be said at this stage is that I don't think it's that important. I don't think the whole
What's
world...
not that important, that the games succeed?
The whole thing, the Commonwealth Games is not the Olympics. The whole world is not looking. The Commonwealth is a small part of the globe. It may be the second or third biggest games in the world, but
so it doesn't matter
so
if the games are a disaster?
I don't think there's any question that it's going to be a complete disaster. I think there will be an element of muddling through, though there may be some things like a few leaking stadiums.
But the mud on the Indian face doesn't matter.
But I don't think it's going to be quite as major an event as many people here say. I mean, the Commonwealth Games is not watched obsessively around the globe. A lot of the greatest athletes in the world obviously are not competing. You've got no Russians, you've got no Chinese,
you've got no Americans.
Got no Americans.
But you have the Brits, you have the Australians, you have the Canadians.
I don't think anyone's going to be sitting counting on Canadians sort of 400 metres and sort of turning their life around over that. It's an important thing, but I think one shouldn't obsess about it and pretend that this is a world-changing event.
Mark Tully, you mentioned a moment ago that the Asian Games of '82 had gone through a similar stage of chaos just before they happened, and at that time it was Rajiv Gandhi allegedly who stepped in and knocked them into place. Now, you were probably covering the Asian Games for the BBC. Are the two situations comparable?
No, they're not really comparable, because the Asian Games was on a far smaller scale, and of course Rajiv Gandhi was a far more powerful person than any one individual who's in charge of these games.
Should Rahul have stepped in this time around?
Well, no, I think he was very wise not to step in, frankly. I mean,
but then you're suggesting that these games are beyond redemption and repair almost.
I'm not suggesting that, Karna. I'm not saying that they are beyond redemption. I'm saying that it is a very difficult task to do.
Herculean and almost impossible.
They're successful. Carrying them off successfully is by no means guaranteed yet.
The government has, of course, stepped in. Mark, a moment ago, ridiculed the IAS officers the government has appointed. He even suggested that they might make a bad situation worse. What's your feeling? Can these bureaucrats stepping in, the government virtually taking control, save the day?
None of us, frankly, know. The situation is pretty dire at the moment, but by all accounts, the stadiums are not up to scratch. The roads are appalling. The whole of the centre of Delhi is already gridlocked, even without the Commonwealth Games. Who knows? It's a very, very difficult one to call. I agree with Mark that IAS officers are not necessarily the ideal hit squad you need at this emergency moment to get it. I mean, a few more, sort of Infosys, sort of business, sort of whizzes, one would have thought would be the people who could really move things.
I mean, a Mukesh Ambani or a Ratan Tata would have been
One might have thought they would have a better chance than a few old chaps from the Minister of Fertilizer Distribution, but we'll see.
How do you read the comments made on Thursday evening by Mike Fennell, the chairman of the Commonwealth Games Federation? The newspapers seem to be in two minds. The Economic Times says he's satisfied, but the Indian Express said he was disappointed, and the Times of India says that he played a balancing role between different forces. What's your interpretation?
Well, my interpretation is that he is quite worried, but he doesn't want to run himself into a lot of trouble, particularly with the press, by coming out and revealing the full extent of his concerns. So what he's trying to do is to ensure that he gets a message across that there is a lot of work still to do without being overcritical of the government or of anything which has happened so far. That's my interpretation.
Gentlemen, let's take a break at that point. I want to come back and ask you, how does the outside world view India's preparations? And if they are scared, are their fears justified? That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to a special Devil's Advocate with Sir Mark Tully and William Dalrymple. Sir Mark, how is India's state of preparedness or lack of preparedness and the horror stories in the Indian press viewed outside India?
Well, if you look at the news agenda at the moment, you look at the floods in Pakistan, and if you look at India, you look at the visit by the Prime Minister, there's so many other things going on. I honestly don't know that the world is getting very concerned or worried about the Commonwealth Games, what's happening in India. Of course, once the athletes start to arrive, and if there's big rumpuses, if they start complaining, if they do, then I think it will come to their attention.
So at the moment, no one seems to be too worried because they're actually concentrating on other things. But if things don't improve, they could be in for a nasty surprise when they arrive in Delhi.
Well, yes, that is true, yes.
What about Dawn Fraser, the Australian swimmer who's won, I believe, 8 Olympic medals in her time? She's asked Australian athletes and swimmers, I suspect in particular, to boycott these games. She doesn't trust security in India, and she's scared that there could be a Munich-style massacre. Are those credible fears?
I think Dawn Fraser is clearly not Einstein, judging by the comments. No, they were ludicrous. The only kind of witty and enjoyable thing really to come out of the whole game's coverage so far. The idea of a Munich-style massacre, who's meant to be doing this? Are the other Palestinians going to turn up and sort of take us all hostage?
No, I think she's scared of terrorists, the LET, the Jaish-e-Mohammed.
No, I think it's a ludicrous claim.
So you literally do laugh them off?
Yes, I don't imagine they're being reported anywhere other than here.
What about the fear that this is an ideal target for terrorists who want to embarrass Delhi? Do you think after what happened in Mumbai in 2008, this is another opportunity that could invite the LET or the Jaish to target Delhi, embarrass India?
Well, I think it's very dangerous and really is wrong, actually, to start forecasting what terrorists will do. I think that we don't know that, and I think very importantly, we don't want to ruin the games. We don't want to play the terrorists' game, which we would be doing by creating artificial fears. After all, through most of the days of the year, most of the years, whole years go by without any serious terrorist incident taking place here. India has learnt lessons from Bombay, and all we can do is believe in the security forces, I think, believe in the Indian police, and try and stop false alarm calls as the one you've described.
Both of you have lived decades in this country. How safe do you feel in Delhi? Does security ever worry you, William Dalrymple? After all, you live in a farm almost 20, 30 miles away from the center of Delhi. The nearest police post must be about 2 or 3 miles away. There are no electric poles on the roads. There's no possibility of a fire brigade getting to you. Are you ever scared in Delhi?
I've never been scared in this country, actually. I mean, shot at a few times by CRPF in Kashmir and things, but never in normal India. I've never been frightened. I've never had anything stolen. I've lived very peaceably. I mean, I find most English city centres on Friday nights infinitely more frightening than even Bihar. Or no, I think this is a very peaceable place. And also, though, of course, you know, there are these moments when things suddenly do well up, the 1984 riots or Gujarat or something. These things can suddenly happen, and the crust of order breaks, and you do get some hideous things going on. But in general, I find it a very relaxing place to live, very easy.
It just so happens that you're going to be back in England over the weekend. If asked this question, will you communicate the same message there to the press?
I will guarantee you I won't be asked this question. I do not think the world is at the moment obsessing about Indian failure with the Commonwealth Games. I think people, India has an incredible positive image abroad. I think people look on this country as through a whole variety of very positive lenses at the moment. There's the old Gandhian images, which are still living on, this place of sort of peaceful non-violence. There's the images of spirituality. There's all the images of sort of incredible India. Plus there's the new stereotypes of hard-working, positive economy. I mean, India has an amazing PR outside. I don't think people are sitting there waiting to jump on India and say, ha, 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 look at you. I also think probably if there are any terrorists, one thing we haven't said is I think they've probably got more busy things to do in Pakistan at the moment than, I mean, they're all the Jaish and the Lashkar probably sitting in dinghies, waiting to try and get back into Murudke and back into Lahore. But I think
the floods in Pakistan are another saving grace. All right, listening to the incredible confidence in the image of India that you've heard from William Dalrymple, what do you say to Indians who tend to look on the Commonwealth Games as if this was India's Beijing Olympics? China used the Olympics as a party to present itself to the world. Will the Commonwealth Games play that function? Or is it stupid to even think of it?
No, I don't think they can possibly play that role, A. And B, the other thing I would say about that is that whilst I would agree with Willie about the image which India has abroad, basically, although I think there is still also an image of it as a very bureaucratic country, a country certainly among businessmen that it's difficult to do business in. But I think in this country there is a real problem with this whole idea that India has already arrived and is a big power, and that if Beijing can do the Olympics, we can jolly well do the Commonwealth Games and show them. I think that this type of thinking is blinding people to the enormous problems that this country still faces.
And is it mistaken? Because so many young Indians today see themselves as competing with China. So many are convinced that in 5 or 10 years we'll overtake China. What do you say to that sort of thinking?
Well, I think it's very dangerous indeed, because I think it's ignoring all the problems. I mean, William talked about the infrastructure. Just take a quick example there, the railways. I just read that the Chinese have built another incredible railway going through incredibly difficult mountainous country. Look at India, we're still stuck. We still haven't gone from Udhampur up to Kashmir.
Let me move a little beyond what we're talking about. You said a moment ago that no one really takes the Commonwealth Games seriously.
I didn't say that. I said that it's not the Olympics.
What about the Commonwealth itself? There are many in India today saying that it's an outdated colonial hangover, that India perhaps ought not to be a member, that it doesn't have much relevance. Would you share that thinking, or would you say it's a bit unfair?
I think the Commonwealth does have a slight sort of problem about what it is and what it's for. The Commonwealth Institute in London closed down 2 or 3 years ago, partly because it didn't have a function. I think the Commonwealth is a institution which had a particular time.
But
that said, you know, there are many positive things that can come out of the Commonwealth. It can put pressure at certain times on countries that step out of line. It can. There are positive things which it can still do, and I think it can be used as a force for good. So I don't think it's completely pointless.
What about the opposite of that? I mean, Nigeria was suspended at one point of time, thrown out because it ceased to be a democracy. That happened to Pakistan. The Commonwealth is perhaps the only institution that a country like Mozambique, which is a Portuguese colony, has actually knocked on the door and wanted to join. Is it unfair to say that this organization of 71 is irrelevant?
No, I think, you know, this sort of thing has been said time and time again. It's nothing new. And the fact that when Pakistan got thrown out, as soon as they possibly could, they wanted to come back again. Mozambique, as you said, knocking on the door. It means that these countries do see a value in this. And after all, don't forget, Karen, you, India, have just sent one of your most impressive diplomats to be the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. So obviously this country takes it seriously.
So you say to Indians who are skeptical, don't exaggerate.
Yeah. Don't exaggerate. I mean, it's not a marvelous organization, but if other countries think it is a valuable organization, why not let it go on and continue?
Gentlemen, a pleasure having both of you with me as guests on this special Devil's Advocate. That was a special Devil's Advocate with Sir Mark Tully and William Dalrymple. Goodbye. Good night.